When you're queuing up at the gates of heaven, you'll want a good story to tell about how you ended up there. But here are 10 people who will want to keep quiet while they wait in line because of the incredibly humiliating ways they died. Number 10. Basil Brown. Carrot overdose. What's the secret to living a long and happy life? Different people will tell you different things, of course, but something you'll often hear is to always enjoy everything in moderation. But this usually refers to things that are considered unhealthy, like wine or chocolate, rather than items more associated with health and wellness like vegetables. But in 1974, British health food fanatic Basil Brown proved you can also die from too much of a good thing when he overdosed on vitamin A. Over the course of 10 days, Brown is said to have consumed around 10 gallons of carrot juice, along with vast amounts of vitamin A supplements. This combination caused him to suffer from cirrhosis of the liver, the same condition caused by chronic excessive alcohol consumption, and his skin developed a mustardy yellow hue before he finally succumbed. So not exactly the most glorious way to go, especially when you ask the question, why? Number 9. Franz Raichel. Prototype parachute fail. Here's another person you might want to ask why he did what he did, but at least he would have been able to claim he was trying to prove a point. That he survived, of course. Franz Raichel was an Austro-Hungarian tailor who moved to Paris in 1898. But although making clothes was his profession, developing a working parachute became his obsession. His aim was to try to create a system that would save the lives of aviators when the rudimentary aircraft they were flying back then inevitably crashed. And he was so confident in his design that he determined to prove it by jumping off the Eiffel Tower with his prototype parachute strapped to his back. At first, everyone assumed he intended to use a dummy for the test. So when he suddenly revealed at the last moment that he intended to jump himself, his friends tried to persuade him against the idea, but to no avail. On the contrary, the doubts of those around him seemed to spur him on, and moments before jumping, he announced to his companions that his parachute would give their arguments the most decisive of denials. When the time to jump arrived, with crowds and film crews watching from below, he seemed to hesitate for just a moment, but then, driven on by bravado and too proud to turn back, he stepped over the side of the Eiffel Tower's first level and dropped like a stone to the ground, his parachute completely failing to open. So, embarrassing because it failed and embarrassing because of all the people watching, but at least now he's famous. And if you're enjoying the video so far, why not help us become just a little more famous too by giving us a quick like and a subscribe to make sure you don't miss any other videos like this, and also to help us keep producing more content like it. All done? Okay, let's continue. Number 8. Elvis Presley. The death of the king on his porcelain throne. From one person who got famous from the way he died, to someone who was hugely famous before he died, Elvis Presley endured one of the most embarrassing deaths of any celebrity. In his heyday, Elvis was a king, an international sex symbol and arguably the most recognizable superstar on the planet. Oh, thank you very much. But by the 70s, he'd really let himself go. He'd ballooned up in weight, by now bursting out of those tight jumpsuits that symbolized the latter part of his career, and he was also heavily abusing prescription drugs. So bad had he become that people even wondered if he was going to make it to the end of his shows without collapsing, and his undignified end was near. The exact circumstances of his death aren't clear, but what's for certain is that he was found dead lying face down on the bathroom floor. Some say he gave himself a heart attack while straining on the toilet, while others say the heart attack struck him while his pants were around his ankles just as he was sitting down to relieve himself. But in any case, it's hardly a fitting way to go for a man once considered the king of rock and roll. Number 7. Michael Anderson Godwin. Death by electric toilet. Elvis is far from the only person to meet their end in the privy, but here's an example that's far more ironic than most. Michael Anderson Godwin was a convicted murderer who had been waiting to be put to death by electric chair, only to be granted a reprieve when his sentence was reduced to life in prison. So he probably thought he'd gotten away with one there, but fate didn't agree. One day in 1989, while seated on the metal toilet in his cell, he was engaged in trying to fix his portable TV. With no tools at hand, he bit into one of the metal wires and was promptly electrocuted where he sat, having unintentionally improvised a very special kind of electric chair all of his own. Amazingly, this isn't even the only time this has happened, because in 1997, another convicted murderer died in almost exactly the same way, when seated on a metal toilet using a set of homemade headphones. Number 6. Gary Hoy, a smashing demonstration of trust. Watch this, I'll prove it to you. Or something along those lines are the last words that are certain to have been uttered many times in the history of the world. And if you say something like that just before dying, it's likely your death will turn out to be a massive facepalm moment. It's not actually clear that Gary Hoy uttered words to this effect just before he added his name to the list of embarrassing deaths. But he might as well have done because the way he died was unbelievably stupid. Hoy was a 39-year-old Canadian lawyer, and he was in the process of trying to prove to a group of onlookers how solid the glass in his office window was. To do this, he stood back, took a run-up, and launched himself bodily against the glass to demonstrate that it wouldn't shatter. And he was right, it didn't. But unfortunately for him, the window frame proved less solid than the glass, and when he hit the window, the frame became dislodged from the wall, and Hoy, along with the window frame and the intact window, plummeted 24 stories down to the hard concrete below. Number 5. Tiko Bra. When you gotta go. Tiko Bra was a 16th century Danish astronomer of some repute. In fact, he's been described as the greatest astronomer of the pre-telescope age. But despite this, and unfortunately for him, nowadays he is probably more likely to be known for his humiliating demise rather than his considerable achievements as a skywatcher. The thing is, as well as being a meticulous observer of the heavens, Bra was also something of a stickler for etiquette. This meant that one evening, when attending a banquet in Prague, he preferred to remain at table rather than taking a quick bathroom break because this would have been considered in poor taste. By the time he got home that evening, he was completely unable to urinate except in tiny amounts and accompanied by excruciating agony. Eventually, he slipped into pain-inducing delirium and died an unedifying death most unbefitting a man of his great achievements. Number 4. Bobby Leech, a most unlikely death by orange peel. If you list your profession as daredevil, you can probably expect your end to come while you're at work. And if you'd asked Bobby Leech as he was preparing to become the first man to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel, he'd probably have agreed that if he didn't die in this stunt, he'd probably end up dead from some other similar escapade in the future. But that's not how it turned out for him. He survived his first drop over Niagara Falls, despite suffering 2 broken kneecaps and a fractured jaw, and requiring a 6-month convalescence in hospital as a result. And it seems he enjoyed the experience so much, he then went back and did it again. This gave him the unique accolade of being not only the first, but also the second man to go over the falls in a barrel. But then, a few years later, when on a publicity tour in New Zealand, he slipped over an orange peel in the street and injured his leg. The wound became infected and his leg had to be amputated. But even this wasn't enough to save him, and 2 months later, he was dead. Done for by a stray bit of fruit after surviving a lifetime of stunts and capers. Number 3. Sigur the Mighty, a scratch on the leg. For Sigur the Mighty, his death would have been 1,000 times worse than the one suffered by Bobby Leech because of the beliefs he would have held as a powerful Viking warlord. As we all know, the only way a Viking wants to die is on the field of battle because that way, you stand a chance of being allowed into the Great Hall of Valhalla to feast alongside Odin while you await the final battle of Ragnarok. And during his lifetime, Sigurd's deeds look set to secure him his spot at Odin's dinner table. But according to the story of how death found him, he then got served a big portion of karma because of a bit of underhand behavior. Sigurd is said to have challenged Maelbricht, the Bucktooth, to a 40-on-40 battle, but then he turned up with 80 fighters on his team. Outnumbering his dentally impaired opponent 2-1, he took the W, and then proceeded to take his enemy's head too. He then strapped the head to his saddle as a trophy and rode off into the sunset, figuratively speaking. But one of Maelbricht's buck teeth scratched his leg and the wound got infected, causing him to drop dead from sepsis not long after. So, an ignominious death for a Viking warrior and not at all what he would have chosen, but you can't say he didn't deserve it. Number 2. Jimmy Hesteldon, Segway accident. Imagine going from being a coal miner to one of the richest people in the UK, only to be killed by the iconic product one of the companies you'd bought produced. Well, that was the fate suffered by Jimmy Hesteldon in a rather embarrassing accident in 2010, just 1 year after he'd bought himself a cool new business. Hesteldon made his fortune with his Hesco Bastion, An efficient barrier system that could be used to construct effective flood defenses as well as military fortifications. The success of this venture allowed him to buy Segway Inc. Yeah, the company responsible for those uncontrollable two-wheeled vehicles that have produced so many embarrassing falling over moments for so many people. But for the owner of the company, his moment wasn't just embarrassing, it was also tragic. This is because when he was out walking his dog on his own personal Segway, he stopped and reversed to let another dog walker go past. Unfortunately, he didn't see the drop behind him, and he ended up reversing over a cliff and falling to his death, Segway and all, in the river below. So, yep, a bit humiliating considering he died using the product his company produced. Not exactly a great advert for these machines, was it? Number 1. John Allen Chow. What did you expect? When people meet an untimely end, most of the time we have at least some sympathy for them. But sometimes people really seem to be asking for what they get, and in those cases, people's response tends to be more like, well, what did you actually expect to happen? Take John Allen Chow, an American evangelical Christian missionary who took it upon himself to travel to the forbidden North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal to visit the Sentinelese tribe and try to convert them to Christianity. If you don't already know, the Sentinelese are a tribe living in voluntary isolation in their small corner of the Andaman Islands, and this is enforced by the Indian military. They have no contact with the outside world and don't want any, and making contact with the tribe is strictly forbidden. Chow, though, completely disregarded all the laws and regulations regarding the island's isolation, as well as the wishes of the Sentinelese themselves, and set out on an expedition to reach them. He enlisted some local fishermen to take him to the island, and after several attempts to reach the island and communicate with the people there, he finally made it ashore. At which point, he was promptly murdered, and his body was buried on the beach. So, an embarrassing death because of his deluded aims and because of the utter failure of his mission, but also because of the almost universal reaction to his death was simply, "What an idiot!" with an eyes to the sky emoji. What a thing to be remembered for. Which one do you think was the most embarrassing? Or have you heard of any that are worse? We're sure you want to have your say, so why not let us know your thoughts in the comment section below? And while you're there, drop us a quick like and a sub if you enjoyed the video to ensure you avoid meeting a similarly embarrassing end yourself.